Thanks, Luke. Michelle.
Michelle Edwards, Rappahannock Rapidan Regional Commission.
Okay, and let's see, let's go to speakers. We'll start with Kevin.
Kevin Burns, Regional Decision Systems.
All right, and Dave.
Yes, hi, Dave Von Drake here from National Weather Service Mid-Atlantic River Forecast Center.
Thank you, Dave. And Rob.
Yes, good morning. I'm Rob Shedd. I'm also with the Mid-Atlantic River Forecast Center.
Okay, great. We may have, I'll try to monitor emails if somebody's having trouble getting in. I'm like I say, I'm expecting a couple more to join us, but we've dragged this out as long as we need to. I'm going to hand it off to Rob. Rob, you should be able to share your screen and tell us about the center. We're anxious to hear.
Okay. Good morning. I really appreciate the opportunity to come to you and share a little bit about who the Middle Atlantic River Forecast Center is and what we do. And so just feel free to interrupt, ask questions as we're going through here. I've got Dave Von Drake here also. So I'm the service coordination hydrologist, sort of in charge of the outreach program for our office. Dave is one of our senior hydrologists. And so I think hopefully we can answer most of the questions that you have. But well, I just want to give an opportunity to give an introduction to who we are. So we are part of the National Weather Service. The mission of the National Weather Service really goes around the protection of life and property and enhancement of the national economy. And for the River Forecast Center, our focus is on the water side, obviously, and really dealing with, for the most part, most of the larger river systems in our region. So if you're not familiar, there's 13 river forecast centers across the country. The map basically shown there. So the Middle Atlantic River Forecast Center is one of the smallest ones you can see by area in terms of area, but in terms of activity, in terms of population, we're one of the busiest ones. So along with the 13 river forecast centers, the 122 weather forecast offices, which you're probably a little bit more familiar with. So even though we provide the forecasts out of our office, all the watches and warnings do come out of the weather forecast offices. So we have across our region about 175 forecast locations. We provide forecasts for every day. River systems that we have, including the Susquehanna, the Delaware, the Potomac, the Rappahannock, and the James. So we do have a substantial amount of tidal and coastal area as well. We generally are not providing forecasts in those areas coming out of our office. In some cases, there are tidal forecasts that are provided by the weather forecast offices, but for the most part, those are handled as small stream issues. So they tend to be fairly small stream. Can be some fast responding locations in there, but those are generally being handled out of the weather forecast offices. So I know I want to give a little bit of a comparison between the River Center and the WFOs. I know you've had Jason Elliott attend your meetings, I believe, in the past, who was with the weather office in Sterling. He just recently transferred, if you're not aware, up to be my course into my position up at the Northeast River Forecast Center up in Massachusetts. So I know the Sterling office will be in the process of trying to fill his position. So I've already talked about the fact that we've got 13 regional offices compared to 122 local offices for the WFOs. The RFCs are strictly focused on the rivers and hydrology of the systems, as opposed to the weather offices that are dealing with all sorts of weather, be it rain, snow, severe weather, hail, coastal issues as well, tornadoes, hurricanes. We pretty much strictly just going on what's happening once the water hits the ground. We do the local modeling and calibration out of our offices for our area, and we are providing forecast guidance. We're not doing the warnings, as I mentioned before. All the warnings are provided by the weather forecast offices. And the real main reason for that is really just to have for emergency managers, especially, to have a single point of contact in their local region. One of the interesting things, with the sort of unique things, I guess, about this part of the country, you're probably very well familiar with, is that flooding is a year-round event. We can be having flooding every single month of the year. We tend to have most of our flooding in the March-April timeframe, as a result of, especially where you get spring snowmelt events. We have a secondary peak in the fall, generally associated with tropical events, but we can have flooding any time of the year. So this is a little bit different than many other parts of the country that have a very specific flood season. And so this is does keep us busy and has to keep us on watch throughout the year. Want to take a look at some of the products and services that are coming out of our office. So we produce what we refer to as a quantitative precipitation forecast. Basically, how much is it going to be raining over the next 3 days? We do this in 6-hour increments out to, and then the rainfall that we're putting into this forecast process winds up going into our river forecasts. So we have a specialized unit, a group of hydrometeorologists who sort of oversee the QPF creation. Dave, who's on the call, is one who is very active in this group. So if there are questions about this, so he's going to be able to help out with that. Although we have a specialized group, we actually have all of our staff actually rotate through and working the HAZ shift and working the QPF. So everybody in our office, no matter when we've got people on, are qualified to do that. I want to take a look at the forecasts that come out specifically in the Rappahannock. So we've currently got forecasts that come out at 3 different locations in your basin, at Remington, at Culpeper, and then at Fredericksburg right now. Generally, our forecasts are updated by 11 a.m. each morning, and a lot of days there might be as early as about 9:30 or so, especially when things are quiet like they are right now. I suspect you'll be seeing forecasts come out pretty early. We're generally routinely forecasting these locations once a day, but when we do have activity on the river, high water, flooding, we will be providing several updates per day as needed as the river conditions change. So this is an example of the product that we're putting out. It's out on the AHAP's website, water.weather.gov. This is an example from 2018 when we did have some flooding on the Rappahannock at Remington, this particular location. So we got information that's available. This is the graphical information, but we also do provide information in a digital fashion if needed as well. Take a look at the forecast process. So we get information in from both observed and forecast rainfall. So the observed information is coming in from both radar as well as rain gauges. We're working closely with the reservoir operators. So the Corps of Engineers, other municipal water supply operators to get information on their reservoirs. Snowpack conditions during the winter and cool early spring. Very important, being able to maintain as far as how much water is in that snowpack and is available to melt out when it comes out. And then we work closely with the United States Geological Survey, who maintains most of the stream gauge network across our region. That information is then all input into our hydrologic model, which refer to as CHIPS, or the Community Hydrologic Prediction System, that we've been using for the past 10 years or so. So we've got the forecasters are directly involved every day with every single forecast location. So we are looking through each single forecast point. So we've set up the model, we've calibrated the model based on long historical records that we've had. And then, as I said, we're bringing in the rainfall forecast. We're doing quality control on river data, river level data, as well as the precipitation data. We can go in and make adjustments to model states, model forcings as necessary to make sure our model is simulating as well as possible. And then, as I mentioned, we are doing coordination with reservoir operators to get the best information in as far as what they're going to be releasing. And then we are finally working with forecast offices to get the products out, working with other water partners as well to share information, to see if there's information that we need to be incorporating into our models as well. Then we do a final review, adjustment, and sending out the forecasts. And as I said, we're generally beginning the forecast process about 8 a.m. in the morning, and then trying to get that primary forecast out by 11 o'clock or so every day. One of the increasing focuses on the Weather Service in the last 5 years or so is what we refer to as decision support services. And it's trying to, working with the partners, trying to find out what the information is that you need in order to be making the decisions that you need to be, whatever that decision process is in your river system. We're trying to balance the best science we can with appropriate communication and making sure that we're doing things in a reasonable fashion. So in order to get information out to partners and public, we've got a number of avenues to do that. Our webpage, weather.gov/MARFC, and I'll be showing that at the end of this slide here as well. We have social media on Twitter and Facebook that we're regularly putting information out. We have some briefing information I'll show you next. We've also been working closely recently with the last several years with some social science partners as well. We've recognized that we can put out really good science in some cases, but if we're not communicating effectively, if we're not preparing graphics in a way that makes sense to external partners and things, it doesn't meet the match. So we've been working very closely with social scientists to sort of improve the way we're communicating with the public. And then doing outreach with partners, talking to organizations like yourselves to say, hey, what is it that you need? What services can we provide that are going to help you do your job better? And so that's partly why I'm here today, is really to touch base with you and see, what else do you need? I mentioned the briefing packages. So we will issue information generally when, 2 or 3 days in advance of some potential flooding in our area. In some cases, we'll issue a briefing package to say that there's not flooding expected, because we know that's important information as well. I will say that when we issue a briefing, it's typically going to be a briefing that's going to cover the entire MARFC domain. And so sometimes you might have flooding down in Virginia, but not up in New York, or vice versa. We'll still send that entire package out to the entire mailing group. And we've talked about trying to possibly subset it into smaller regions, but a lot of our partners have said, knowing what's going on in other parts of the region sort of helps us plan appropriately. And so we do at this point send everything to everybody. Sometimes it's a one pager like this. It basically gives a high level overview of what's going on. Typically we'll be doing this a little bit earlier in an event or lower impact event. In other cases, we might show several slide PowerPoint type of presentation that will go through the entire scenario of what's going on to give a little bit more detail. We generally do not lead flood webinars ourselves, but we'll participate as requested for others. And if anybody wants to be added into our briefing mailing list who's not currently getting information, just send me an email, ask me to be added on. That's robert.shed@noaat.gov, and again, that'll be on the last slide as well. One of the things we've been working on, as I mentioned, our deterministic forecast right now generally go out 3 days. We have found that a number of users, from emergency managers, water operators, find information that they need information more in the 3 to 10 day time range. And so we've been working for the last 10 years or so trying to figure out ways that we can produce information that has value in that longer term horizon. And so we've been working, we've got a couple of projects we've got there. Both of them are available right now on this weather.gov/ERH/MMEFS webpage, to give information in more of a probabilistic sense. And so this MMEFS is using raw atmospheric ensemble models to basically take those raw atmospheric models, run them through our hydrologic models, and give a range of possibilities. So this particular location, this is an event up in New York a while ago. The most likely condition was this area in the orange shaded area, was there was potential for some moderate flooding. But there was information in the models that basically said there's, although our most likely is moderate flooding, there's still a possibility that we could be seeing some major flooding. And so we were able to get that information out as well to say, hey, this is sort of the broader range of what we're looking at here. More recently, we've been working on what we refer to as a hydrologic ensemble. It's fairly similar in a lot of ways, except for some users, we're finding that the 7 to 10 days that the other one generally provides isn't even that sufficient. And we've got, for instance, New York City water supply system is actually gets a forecast from us through this HEFS out a year in advance. I'm not sure the quality of the information out at a year in advance. I think our skill is still really limited to about a 2-week time period, but they're able to find some sort of signal that helps in their optimization schemes for their reservoir systems. The HEFS should provide a little bit better long-term average conditions. So we're trying to work at both of these systems coming in through here as far as way of providing some better information and that more extended time horizon. Both of these, both the MMEFS and HEFS, are available at almost all of our river forecast locations, including locations in the Rappahannock. Longer range forecasting, it's a challenge. The smaller river systems in the eastern part of the country means that a lot of our rivers typically are up and down in 12 to 24 hours, and so trying to provide a 3 to 4, 5-day forecast in those locations can be a bit of a challenge, because it means we're very highly dependent upon how much rain is going to be falling. That's a very challenging element to forecast. The snowpack is also can be, out in the western U.S., you're typically looking at a snowpack that might have a several-month accumulation period and then followed by a several-month melt period, as opposed to our part of the country. We can be seeing things up and down several times during the winter season. And then finally, the skill of the climate models in the eastern U.S. is not quite as doesn't give us quite as strong a signal for longer term forecasting as it does in western U.S. Oops. I will say another piece of information can be helpful for people. We do provide precipitation monitoring, and so these maps provide information from a departure from normal standpoint. So it may be supporting drought monitoring, and so we're providing information on 30, 60, 90-day year-to-date departures, as well as several other time periods. These maps are updated every day on a county level, basically sometime generally between 11 a.m. and noon. And I've got the link there that basically right off of the MARFC webpage to get that information. So again, this can be useful for information for a lot of people as well. Inundation mapping. We've been doing a fair amount of work in the last several years at creating what we refer to as inundation maps that depict where we might be having areas of flooding. And most of this has been done through the Silver Jackets program, which is a interagency program. I'm not sure if some of you are involved with the Virginia Silver Jackets, that allows us to work on joint areas of information between different federal state agencies involved with the water flood management. I'll be talking, so I bring this up because we should be seeing some inundation maps. We currently got some maps under development on the Rappahannock in the Fredericksburg region that are going to be coming out probably sometime in about a year from now or so, I think, at this point. And I'll give you this is an example of a map in Pennsylvania. So this is basically depicting in Bloomsburg, Pennsylvania, what record flooding can look like at each one at this particular location. So really getting down into more the neighborhood level, saying, okay, when we say it's going to be 15 feet or something like that at a particular location, what does that really mean? What's that look like? And so these maps will get into allow you to depict at different levels what the impact is. So that can be from a planning standpoint that it can have a lot of value. And if we're in a flood situation, being able to see the areas that are going to be impacted. And so we look forward to seeing these maps being available on the Rappahannock in the near future. Forecasting challenges. I wish I could say that our forecasts that we're putting out every day were perfect, but they're not. Precipitation forecasting is a challenge, being able to know when, where, and how much. So we can have a forecast in some cases that will look pretty good, but if where that rainfall is 50 miles off from where we expect, which is fairly frequent occurrence, especially this, as we go into this convective season, having that tends to be a lot of uncertainty as far as where that heavy rain might be falling that we need to be tracking down. Reservoir modeling, as I said, we've got some fairly close cooperation with our reservoir operators, but sometimes making sure that we're on the same page with them. Snow modeling is a big challenge. We have a lot of observers who provide us information generally in valley locations, but getting information on what's going on in higher elevation areas, how much snow's out there, how much water's in that snowpack, can be a challenge sometimes. I mentioned before the idea of how we communicate is important to us, and working with the social scientists and how we communicate that probability and uncertainty that I mentioned in some of our products before. We're making sure that what we're saying is understood by the users is very important, and we're trying to work better to work on that. Expansion of the inundation map availability, I mentioned that already. That we're trying to work that, but we simply haven't been able to do that at every location. It's one of those things that takes time, it takes money to do the modeling appropriately. So we're glad that we're able to get something into the Fredericksburg region and look forward to that. River ice and ice jams, not as much of a problem in Virginia as some other parts of our area. But the science really just doesn't support any modeling for ice on the rivers at this point, how that's going to be moving. So that can be a challenge. Rapid onset flooding, and what I'm talking about that is that those flash flood situations that can be occurring. If we recall the 2018 season when we had a large number of events, 4, 5, 7-inch rainfall events that occurred. Being able to get that information in a timely fashion that's going to say this is where these areas are going to be most impacted, is getting that information out to you is going to be a challenge at this point still. I want to talk a little bit some larger picture things. So for the last several years now, the Weather Service has really been making a large push in the water community. So the National Weather Service always tend to be focused on a lot of the severe weather type of aspects, the hurricanes, tornadoes, but I think they're beginning to recognize the impacts of water are very, very challenging. And so looking at from water security, water quality type of issues, sometimes having too much water, sometimes too little water. So there's been a very strong investment in the water program within the Weather Service, within NOAA, and really across several different agencies. And one of the things that has come out of that has been the development of the National Water Center down in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, on the University of Alabama campus. And this is a joint interagency project led by NOAA, the National Weather Service, but with involvement from the USGS, Corps of Engineers, FEMA, as well as academia. And so really trying to bring together various federal water partners into one location and working together to meet the water needs of the country. And one of the main things that they're working on right now is been the national water model. And so this has been in development now for about the last 5 years or so. It's still going to be under development for quite a while, I think, but they've come a long ways. And so one of the things I mentioned is that, within our area, we're able to have about 175 locations in Rappahannock. We've got 3 forecast locations. The goals of the National Water Model is to be modeling just about every stream reach across the country. So I think there's like 3 million stream reaches or something like that across the country that we're going to be able to be providing information on. And so zooming into a little bit more into Virginia area now. So each one of these reaches that you see on this map, we're going to be providing information for as far as what's going on. So this particular map is basically showing what's the potential for reaching bank full conditions on each one of these stream reaches. And so this was an event back last October. So these areas that you see up in Pennsylvania, fairly low probabilities, but as we get down into Virginia, we've got some areas of some, 50%, 50, 70% chance of probability of getting into flooding. And so being able to provide information like this, I think is going to be very, very valuable. As I said, I think it's still very much a work in progress. I think looking at sort of the regional scales like this, I think there's probably a lot of really good information as far as, hey, we got to be watching what's going on here. At some point, some of the local details can get a little fuzzy just because, as I said, the uncertainty as far as exactly where that rain is going to be falling and how much rain is going to be falling, especially when you're talking day 3, 4, or 5, is definitely a challenge. But it's an exciting development. So we're up to look at this information, but I will say this is, I mentioned before the forecasting we're doing, the River Center is all, the forecaster is directly involved in what's going on, very much so. This is much more of a hands-off process. So it's, I generally think at forecast locations, at the river gauge locations, I think the quality of the forecasting we're going to be able to be doing out of the River Center, we're able to look at things do the quality control on a day-to-day basis. I think we'll generally be seeing better things, but being able to see information at this scale, I think is also very exciting. Another new product that I'll say coming out of the Water Center began last year is what's referred to as this Flood Hazard Outlook product. This has started last year and will continue this year as a tropical season, tropical event type of product. So I don't remember exactly which event this was. Actually, it says it was Hurricane Ada last year that came up and impacted through our area. And so this is basically given, again, a sort of a region-wide cross RFC boundary sort of look. So you can see here, this is, areas impacted in 3 different river forecasts on our areas. So it's basically being, continuous product. And so being able to identify where the considerable risks that we really need to be paying attention to with our flooding situations. So this product will be continuing this year for tropical events, and I believe the intention is that probably a year from now or so, this will be a year-round product across the country, highlighting where the areas of potential flood concerns are over the next several days. So I believe that's all I've got for today. This is the information we've got. So follow our website at weather.gov/MARFC, social media, NWS-MARFC, and feel free to send me an email at robert.shutt@noaa.gov at any time, and I'm glad to answer any questions people might have at this point.
Any question? Well, I tell you what, before we open it for questions, we had 3 folks join us after Rob got started, and I want to give them the chance to introduce themselves and who they represent. And I'm going to start with David, if you're ready.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I'm David Nunley with Caroline County.
Very good. Thanks, David. A new member to the group, Jack McGovern.
Jack McGovern, Fredericksburg Fire Department, and Deputy Emergency Manager for the City of Fredericksburg. Position that was recently held by Victor Pabielski, and he's moved up in the ranks, and I've moved up into his position. So look forward to working with everybody, and very familiar with the Rappahannock in this area as a former dive and water rescue team leader. And I'm also a master underwater criminal investigator diver for in this river. So spent many times on top of it and underneath it.
Very good. Welcome, Jack. Good to have you as part of the group. And Paul, I think that's Paul Howard because it says Paul's iPhone. I probably caught Paul off guard. All right. Okay. Questions for Rob?
Eldon, this is Kevin. I have one for Rob.
Go ahead.
With all of the interesting modeling efforts underway, what struck me is your particular service area pretty closely overlaps the Chesapeake Bay watershed.
Right.
And I was wondering whether your modeling efforts have or will be taking into account, the evolving land changes in land cover and trends in land cover change as a factor in forecasting inundation patterns and so forth.
Yeah. So basically, I mentioned that we do model calibration, and that's something we have to, continually update all the time. And so one of the things that is involved in that calibration is understanding what the land use, land cover is over a particular area. And so, if we've got an urbanized area, obviously the response is very different than in a much more rural type of area. And so that information is captured essentially as part of that calibration effort. So we're continually having to update that. So looking at the Chesapeake Bay, we basically do have most of the Chesapeake Bay as part of our forecast system. We've been working, we've actually had a couple of students in the last several years that have actually been working with the Chesapeake Bay program located in our office, and actually working at seeing how does the information coming out of modeling from river forecasts from the rivers draining into the Chesapeake actually help model some of the Chesapeake Bay water quality type of issues. So we've been working pretty closely with the Chesapeake Bay program as a whole as well.
Thank you.
Yes. Anything else?
Other questions?
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead. Brent.
Brent Hunsinger, Friends of the Rappahannock. I was wondering if offhand, I know this is very specific, speaking to the inundation maps that are coming, if you knew the specific locations of those. I think I heard you say that they are Fredericksburg centric. Is that correct?
I'd have to look that up exactly. It's it's basically, it's primarily just through the Fredericksburg reach. I don't know how far above Fredericksburg it's going. It's typically limited by how far some of that modeling can occur, but that's work is being done by the Corps of Engineers. I could get that information back to you, but I don't have it offhand. But it's focused in the Fredericksburg reach.
Other questions? All right, I've got one for you, Rob. You talk about you've got 3 locations, and the challenges with forecasting, and then the importance of kind of 3-hour notice on flash flood. We've been struggling for years to get more gauges on the river. And
Okay.
we've had a number of times we've gone forward and then not been able to get to the end of the day. We actually had a project. Well, I'm going to put it in the present tense. We still have a project working with the with the state and Department of Homeland Security to get some kind of state-of-the-art gauges in. It was kind of a demonstration project. And then, of course, when the pandemic came along and the emergency was declared, you know, our emergency management agency at the state level just hadn't been able to spend, you know, the project just had to be temporarily shelved. Hopefully, as we come out of this over the next several months, we'll be able to stand that back up. One of the things that we learned in all those discussions was if you've got a very localized gully washer, you could have an impact that you guys wouldn't even be able to predict because your radars go over top of or whatever. Any thoughts on that type of issue?
Yeah, and I may have Dave chime in on some stuff here as well. So yeah, I mean, I think as I said, we're generally looking at within the river forecast center areas of, say, that have drainage areas of about 100 square miles or greater. But it's not to say, you know, we are looking at I know some other gauges that upstream of the three gauges that we provide forecasts for. Um, so we sort of incorporate that into our information. You know, I think, as I mentioned, if we're looking at some smaller stream type things like that, which I'm guessing is maybe what you're referring to,
Mhm.
you know, I think the local forecast offices are generally looking at that and I think it's certainly helpful for them to be able to see that information and provide um, flash flood warnings as necessary as well. And so I think there's opportunities. I think there's certainly opportunities to incorporate them into some other local forecast techniques as well that you might be running, you know, locally yourself. But I think, you know, I always say I think there's more information is the better, basically. The challenges that I've seen in the past with um, the challenge with getting gauges is always you know, getting the continuous funding. I think we've seen a lot of locations where we can get funding in to get a gauge set up and established, but then having the continuous funding to maintain it for the next 5, 10, 20 years, whatever, can be a challenge at times. And I think that's where I've seen a lot of local efforts have struggled with that. Um, but, you know, and then it's a matter of, you know, are we going through the process of funding a, you know, USGS stream gauge site, which I know costs a little bit better, costs a little bit more, but perhaps um, might have a little bit more information available in some cases as well, and from a maintenance standpoint. But yeah, it is a challenge. I mean, I think you know, the radar coverage over the Rappahannock, I think, is generally pretty good. So I don't think from the standpoint there, having adequate rain gauge information is also very important. I would, you know, looking at you know, if we're looking at adding stream gauges, take a look at what the rain gauge network is as well, and seeing if there's something could be accompanied there. Dave, I don't know if you've got any other thoughts with that or not.
Yeah, I was just gonna mention that they got pretty good radar coverage there.
Yeah.
And even with some of the new technologies that we're using, um, if there is an area that gets overshot, we have some software that will recognize that and then bring data from the next higher scan down and make some rainfall estimates from that. So, but I think that's further out from where you are, close to Sterling's radar. Um, I think if you do find a way to get money for a gauge, I think Rob makes an excellent point. If you're going to put a river gauge in there, see if you can put a rain gauge on top of it. That kind of information is very valuable and just only improves our forecasting.
Dave, do you know what the rain gauge network looks like in the Rappahannock? I don't know offhand myself.
Yeah, actually, if you go back up to that slide, the one that, yeah, keep going. right there.
Yeah.
Go down. It's hard to see in the gray. So it's in the bottom left, that map next to the radar. That shows, I don't know if you can get out of present mode, you could blow that up for them. But we have pretty good radar, rain gauge coverage there. I think, you know, we can always use a good, another good quality gauge that we can trust. So, you know, if that's possible, I think you would get a bang for the buck out of that.
Well, what we'll do as emergency management kind of comes out of emergency operation modes and can come back into this project, we actually have funding for a number of gauges in the middle and upper basin, which is where our big hole is. And it's a combination of stream and rain gauges.
Excellent.
But what we'll do is we start to wake back up, if you will. Dave and Rob, I'm going to engage you two guys to just to inform you of what our plan has been going to go forward.
Okay. Yeah.
Once I just, you know, we're in the mode where our folks there are just telling me they can't spend any time on it until the emergency declaration's over.
Sure.
So.
That's understandable.
And I'd also certainly work closely with the Sterling Forecast Office as well. I know it's a little bit more challenging with Jason not there at this point and his replacement not being selected, but I think they might have some good insight as far as where some of the needs are and what, you know, what they might, you know, if we're looking at a flash flood warning support thing, I think having them involved in that process as well will be very important.
And
I have a couple questions.
Go ahead, Jack.
We've experienced some sunny day floods down here in Fredericksburg as a result of significant rainfalls upstream. You know, we use a rule of thumb, you know, anywhere from 10 to 14 hours, what happens upstream is going to make its way down to the fall line here in the city of Fredericksburg. And we've had situations where we've had to pull, you know, upwards of 30 people off the river in the fall line and never received a drop of rain in 24 hours. Can we, and I guess if I remember the slide correctly, the National Weather Service is the one that triggers the warnings and alerts. And I guess where I'm going with this is, you know, when a flash flood watch or even a flash flood warning occurs on, say, one of the Remington or Culpeper gauges on the Rapidan or the Rappahannock farther upstream, when it triggers that, is there a way we can issue alerts, if you will, not necessarily warnings or watches? I know, and I know we're getting ready to change all of that terminology as well. Right. But this question is two-part. Can we do something like that to where we can alert our emergency managers further downstream, or even the public if they sign on to a notification system? And then the second part of this is, are there plans to make the graphics more user-friendly for the layperson to understand?
Okay.
I'm not a meteorologist, and nor are a lot of the people that come and enjoy our river around here. But you know, i.e., I see this happening on the Remington gauge. What does that translate to at the Fredericksburg gauge?
Sure. No, great questions. And you know, I think I will say, you know, we are looking at the you know, basically all three of these gauges, and I know there's a couple upstream gauges. Dave, refresh my brain. The upstream gauges that we're looking at in the Rappahannock. I'm pretty sure there is a couple there. But so basically, when we're getting rises on, say the Remington or Culpeper gauges, that information is being directly routed downstream, and so it should be reflected in the Fredericksburg forecast as well. So we should be seeing that information being reflected there. Sometimes it's a matter of as I said, when we get these real rapid response things, getting that, trying to get that, our model is a 6-hour time step model. So when you get these real heavy 1-2 hour rains, we don't always reflect it as well as we might like to. And so learning how to correlate what's going on at the upstream down to the downstream location is certainly an appropriate thing to do. So hopefully the information we're providing is reasonable. If there's areas that we feel like we've got some examples that perhaps things didn't translate quite as well, it's certainly something we need to go back and take a look at our model calibrations. We've been working at setting some areas up with hourly time step modeling, so we can see those things when they are challenged. So we are continually working on that. If there's if there's areas that you're seeing that perhaps have impacts, say further downstream from those river gauges, I know the Sterling office does maintain information and impacts from a river gauge, and so it may be that they
Okay,
need
Leonard
to start
James.
looking at coordinate that information a little bit further downstream so it gets incorporated
I'm
into their
good.
forecast and warning process.
Yeah,
Um,
okay, thank you.
in regards to the graphics, I mentioned that we've been working with social scientists to try to get things in a more meaningful fashion as much as possible. I'm so I think we've been trying to do things so that they are meaningful to the layperson, not strictly a meteorologist, hydrologist. So I'm open to suggestions as far as what that might be. These are, it's a little bit challenging to make some changes, but I will say this is actually a good time to have some discussion about the graphics. The AHAPS webpage is going to be going through an overhaul in the next couple of years. I think we're going to be seeing some initial things coming out as soon as the end of this calendar year. So if there's thoughts as far as where you feel that something's not where it needs to be, not as understandable, let's have that discussion. What you think might be have some areas for improvement there.
Rob, we do have a number of gauges upstream of the forecast points that we can see. There's, I think there's Ruckersville, Locustdale, and Robinson for the Culpeper Basin. And there's a number, I want to say Laurel Mills maybe. So there's a number of gauges that we can see, and that's all information provided by the USGS, so you can see it too. But I think maybe what might help you, Jack, is having some sort of a little program that calculates the rate of rise. How much has the river risen in the last hour or the last 3 hours? And maybe that would give you guys some heads up as to what might be expected. I think the other thing I'd mention was, the model has to route that water from point A to point B, and we kind of know what the travel times are. And I don't know, that it changes a little bit with the amount of flow, but maybe if we provided you with some of that information to say, hey, how long does it take to get from here to there? Maybe that would even be helpful as some base knowledge for you.
That would absolutely be beneficial, especially for our dive and water rescue team leaders, not just here in the city, but also in our neighboring communities. So thank you for that information. I appreciate all the feedback.
Yeah, so feel free to send me an email with your contact information, and we'll see what we can get to you, because we do have some point-to-point relationships that we do maintain within our model, so we can potentially share some of that with you. So get in touch with me, robert.judd@noaa.gov.
Okay, we got time for one final question, if anybody has one. If not, Rob, thank you very, very much. And Dave, thank you as well. We really appreciate it. we're going to want to have more of these conversations as we go along. And so we're going to just keep you guys on our technical committee list, and you'll get our emails, hear from us every month or so. And if something comes up from y'all's end that you feel we need to know about, let me know.
Okay.
And we can get the word out.
Yeah, if you have anytime you've got questions or want us back and have some more discussions about some of these topics, if there's some specific things that you want to talk about, we'd look forward to having those discussions. So really do appreciate the time and opportunity we've had to come down here, and hopefully sometime we can actually do things face to face. I wouldn't mind coming down to that area. My son's down in Richmond, so getting down there is not a bad thing for me.
Okay, well, that sounds good. And yes, we will be communicating more. I can't give you a timetable at this point, but especially as we reactivate the Gauges project. And with that, I'm going to transition.
Yeah, David and I are going to be having to drop off the call at this point, I think, because we got our some other training coming up here shortly. But appreciate the opportunity. So
Okay, great. Thank you, Ron. Thank you, Dave.
Hey, thanks for having us. I appreciate it.
And we're going to switch gears here to over to Kevin Burns and talk a little bit about some of the ground cover data and modeling. And Kevin, I think you should be able to share your screen.
Do I change the share screen to multiple participants? I'm assuming.
You should be able to just push the button and share your screen. Hopefully. There you go.
Okay. Let me load it. Okay. So my interest in this subject goes back to the experience of trying to work in the region in the Middle Basin, developing the green infrastructure plan, and then the spin-off work with the forest retention healthy watershed project for the 5 or 6 years after I retired. And I've always been an advocate that there's no point in capturing the data once, because its value is dependent upon a time series of data that can help inform policymakers and planners and whatnot about trends. So, you know, since the Bay model actually invested in additional data, and some of you, some of the organizations, the FOR and Northern Neck and Middle Peninsula PDCs have already got plans to use the upcoming data. I thought maybe the rest of the group would benefit from understanding what's coming, and I'd like to hear from people of who the potential audience of data users might be, and how might they use that. So, excuse me, let me get the slideshow running there. Okay, so so just a quick summary: review the historical and future data releases, the geographic coverage differences, the land cover classification differences, who's going to host the data, what I see as some of the data management issues, and some of the applications and open discussion. So the historic data was based on 2014 imagery from the USDA National Agricultural Imagery Program, and was released through VGen in 2016. The upcoming data will be released in 2021 based on 2018 imagery and LiDAR. And the implications of the use of LiDAR will be apparent in a moment from the classification differences. And that release is scheduled for winter 2021-2022. And then the 2024 data release based on 21-22 imagery is scheduled to come out sometime in 2024. specific time frame uncertain at this point. So the coverage difference, the initial data set in Virginia was statewide. The upcoming data will be just the Chesapeake Bay watershed area extended to the outer limits of any counties touched by the watershed boundary. What that looks like is reflected here. You can see the watershed boundary snaking its way in this red line across sort of central Virginia. And so the red area beyond that would be the full counties that will also be included in the data set. In terms of classification differences, Virginia had a 12 class data set in the initial data set, whereas the 2014 data, which the Chesapeake Conservancy and their partners at the University of Vermont will be reclassifying the old data to conform to this 13 class. And there are some differences that you see here in terms of impervious surfaces versus impervious roads, whereas impervious basically was two categories based on source of data. But there are some other differences, tree canopy versus forest, and so on. The Bay program tends to refer to the 2018 and 2021 data series as land use data because of the additional descriptors that subdivided into 28 classes, which are summarized here. You have, excuse me, sorry for the landline. The general classes: water, wetlands, forest, production, and developed lands, and subcategories of all of those create a much more, robust data set. So the scope of work for the Conservancy and the University of Vermont partners is to first reclassify the existing 2014 data set to conform to the classes used throughout the rest of the Chesapeake Bay watershed and used in the Chesapeake Bay water quality, the TMDL water quality model. After that, the 2018 data will be classified using that consistent classification to get a 2014 to 2018 comparative data set as shown here under number 3. Then the fourth task is to go back to the 2014 data and reclassify it further into that 21 class system. Likewise, to do the same with the 2018, and then to calculate under the expanded classification system, the land use or land cover change from 2014 to 2018. In 2024, then, using the expanded land cover classification system, they would then characterize the land cover with the expanded system based on the 2021-2022 data set, and then calculate the changes from 2018 to the last data point. In terms of data hosting, the existing data is hosted in non-user friendly continuous data tiles that cover Eastern Virginia, Central Virginia, and Western Virginia, and are available in raster and vector data formats. Raster being each pixel of your screen represents 1 meter on the ground, and so continuous pixels in a common class all look the same. So you have larger areas in forest or impervious or what have you. In vector, basically, all those areas get grouped together and bounded with a border line to separate the forest from impervious or whatever adjacent land cover there is. Under the upcoming release for 2018 and 2021, the Chesapeake Conservancy will host on their website data sets for the entire watershed, a separate extracted data set for each state area of the watershed. And then I suppose under that state, then the independent counties and cities that make up the coverage area for that state. But the data set will only be in raster format. In terms of data management issues that I see with these changes and so forth, number one, it's going to require, even though there will be a layer that calculates the land cover changes between each two data points, giving you a trend from 2014 through 2021 eventually. The users will need access to GIS software like Spatial Analyst or similar software to manipulate the raster data or convert it to raster, from raster to vector format to use in a different GIS program perhaps. Secondly, multi-jurisdictional watersheds such as, well, I don't know, the Rappahannock River Basin, for example, would be very cumbersome to assemble a basin-wide picture from the individual counties, but extracting that from the state layer would be less complicated, but more data intensive, of course. So similarly, other kinds of combinations for unique study areas or smaller watersheds, either may be cropped from an individual county or from the state file, depending upon the the geography of that particular project. The other sub-county geographies like independent towns, military installations, state and federal parks, that one might want to clip or crop out of the data set to sort of look at the balance of the study area, whether it's a county or balance of a watershed and so forth, that data will need to be clipped out so that the summary statistics reflect just the sub area of interest outside of federal or state or town control from a land use standpoint. From applications, obviously, all of this work is, number one, driving the updates to the Chesapeake Bay TMDL model for 2025 and measuring interim progress in 2021, as well as demonstrated by the applications from Friends of the Rappahannock, the work on local WIPs or green infrastructure plans of one kind or another. I foresee that some communities with the GIS capacity maybe use the updated information to take a refreshed look at their natural resource and land cover inventory, and maybe some of the recommendations from the Healthy Watersheds Phase 3 report in terms of amending their comp plan to value the forest and other natural resources in the community. So that's kind of my take on it, but I'd like to hear from the remaining audience. What do you, ladies and gentlemen, see as uses for this data that I may not have mentioned already?
Okay, thoughts, comments, questions?
Kevin, this is Michelle Edwards. Well, it's going, this data is going to be going into our BMP prioritization tool and the Upper Rappahannock watershed plan that is in development now. So that's how we'll be using the data.
Yeah, this is John at PEC. I'd say the same. It's going to work towards helping us prioritize investments and everything from BMPs to easement targeting and so forth.
I did learn a sort of in preparation for today. I touched base with Olivia Devereaux, with Devereaux Consulting, who maintained the CAST modeling system to try and replicate what the Bay model does and as a tool for BMP prioritization. And I asked her whether she knew if the Bay program was committed to incorporating the revised data into the CAST model, and she said that had not yet been decided as of a couple weeks ago anyway, by the land use work group of the Bay program. And I haven't had a chance to find out. They were going to have a meeting, I think, earlier this month since I talked with her about this. So I don't know if any decisions have been made, but it seems like a no-brainer that, the tool that they're trying to get all the planning entities to use for BMP implementation ought to reflect the data sets that you're supposed to, be considering in making, policy and public work investments.
This is Brent Hunter. I can see it, frankly, informing a lot of conversations regarding tree canopy conservation and tree planting efforts in the coming couple of years, especially in regarding the tree canopy bill that was passed by the General Assembly, and then the resulting work study group that is going to have to occur between now and November. The hope is that we're going to identify where we're losing the most tree canopy and where we need to concentrate on preserving that canopy, and then increase tree planting efforts in certain areas of concern.
This is Michelle Edwards again. Yeah, Brent, I think that's a wonderful point. To Kevin's point, I think the issue with CAST is it doesn't show anything spatially. It just, gives you a data table. It doesn't tell you where on the landscape those BMPs should go. And that's really what this data set helps with. So you can visualize it of where specifically the BMPs should go in your county or region.
But Michelle, as I remember CAST, as you drill down, can't you get to different HUC levels where you're getting, and the more local you get in terms of smaller HUCs, the data set would be missing unless they populate it with extracts that have been clipped by that HUC geography.
Well, I mean, part of the gripe always with CAST and the larger Bay model is that it doesn't work well at the finer scales. So I don't know that too many people use it for that.
Okay.
Because of those issues. The farther you drill down, the less accurate it is, because it was originally intended to be a Bay-wide model. Right. So I don't know the answer to that, how accurate it would be as you drill down further and further. And I also don't know how fine of a scale you can go. Like if it's, I can't recall if it's going to give you that level of detail. I know we've even had issues just trying to get ag BMP data at a usable scale, at a fine enough scale to be able to use for prioritization. Right. So I don't think I don't think they're releasing that data through CAST, especially for ag BMPs. That's my interpretation of things.
Right. One of the interesting things that in conversing with the program manager at the Conservancy, the list of, and I'm going to try and change screens to get to it. the list can you all see that?
No, we still see the PowerPoint.
Oh, okay. Well, I shared with Eldon, let me just go back to the PowerPoint. The entire list of the cities and counties, and interesting, 2 towns, the town of Clifton Forge and the town of Bedford. And I said, well, why those 2 towns? I mean, there are a couple hundred more in Virginia's portion of the watershed. And she didn't know the answer to that, but I suspect it's because they're being treated as independent cities, which they once were.
Right.
And for that reason, I guess for historical continuity, they're keeping them as discrete units. I tried to lobby that, you know, more towns or towns above a certain area or population threshold ought to be in their scope of work. But, you know, she said, hey, if they give us more money, we'd be happy to do more. So, well, thanks for your comments. I hope this was helpful and informative. And I commend the FOR group for using this data, and I hope they get some good product out of it.
Thanks, Kevin.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. Okay. You see on your agenda the upcoming meeting schedule, and you, those of you who joined early, you heard the chairman and I talking a little bit about the upcoming commission meeting, June 23rd. We'll be in Richmond County. We are, it looks like, I feel pretty confident we'll be in person, exact location to be determined. So stay tuned on that. And question to the group. Some suggestions on agenda items for this group going forward. Okay, Brent, you've got any number of projects going on across your area. Is anything that that you guys could that would be helpful to bring us up to date on, that we might be able to provide you some feedback on?
Absolutely. I can mention a few things now, and then going forward, we're certainly happy to present, especially on one of the programs that I'll mention, the River Ambassador program that actually Jack McGovern, I'm very interested to talk to you about. Welcome, congratulations on your new position. So we have let me just go through a few things that we've been doing, and then we can talk about what might be desired to speak on later. We have a lot of river cleanups going on. It's proven in a few counties to be, we've been able to really start working with Parks and Rec staff and some of the PDCs on the litter issue in the watershed. There's obviously been a lot of litter. COVID has forced a lot of takeout containers. People don't go to the restaurant, so they eat a lot of their food and throw it out the window, unfortunately. So we're seeing a lot of that. So we've really tried to ramp up our litter cleanup efforts. Caroline and King George counties, we're going to have a bunch coming up soon. But watershed wide, we are ramping up our litter cleanup efforts. And so we are glad to work with localities on, or any partners on, ramping up those programs here as we go forward. Perhaps our biggest thing, I guess I should say, with our roundtable partners, the Rappahannock Roundtable, we were able to plant over 50,000 trees this spring. So that's a fantastic number. We were able to actually, I think, do 30,000 in one fell swoop at one wildlife management area, which was pretty fantastic. So thus the power of networking, we were able to cut a check for that and have that done right away. But the biggest thing I'd like to talk about is the River Ambassador program. Now this program is only kind of concentrated in Planning District 16, but it's kind of a model that could potentially be used in the future watershed wide. Obviously depends on funding. We have hired 2 river ambassadors that will be working in Fredericksburg, Stafford, Spotsylvania, as well as King George and Caroline counties on river access, river safety, and litter abatement issues. And with a special concentration on, we've been able to hire 2 bilingual river ambassadors who are working, started May 1st and will be working until September on reaching out to Spanish-speaking populations as well. So that program is well underway and has been involved in a lot of training, really. It's been on the water training. We've had a couple of trainings with nonprofits from Northern Virginia and Maryland who are do outreach to Spanish-speaking populations on watershed issues. So that's been very informative, and they've been gracious enough to provide their time and materials to us on kind of some lessons learned before we even begin this program. So this program is going to it's kind of like a guinea pig for how we're going to figure out what works, what doesn't work. And our hope is to go forward with this lessons learned, find funding, to continue this program into the future and have someone, hopefully, I think eventually, that will be able to work watershed wide on issues of many kinds, but in a bilingual format. And so I think it's been a lot of fun and been very informative as well. That will be we will be doing paddles, a lot of public paddles, boat trips, and then a lot of outreach as well at several high use parks in the region, especially Falmouth Beach, Old Mill Park, City Dock in Fredericksburg, as well as some of the higher use sites along the river in the other counties, as well as outreach to community groups who express interest in having our river ambassadors go speak to their groups somewhat during the week in the evenings as their schedules dictate as well.
Thank you, Brent. I think what let's do is let's dedicate a little bit of agenda time at our June meeting to hear a little bit more about it. I'm really glad to hear the bilingual effort. That's been a problem. I'm just anecdotally over a number of years remember the stories of issues in both Old Mill Park and Falmouth Beach, where you got people in harm's way because of the storms upriver, and you got communication issues. And so I'm sure Jack can talk far more about it than I can. But I've just heard enough stories over the years. So other items, John, you got anything going on up in the upper that new and exciting?
Nothing really to report on other than the fact that we've been doing a project on beef cattle processing, working with a number of processors to figure out ways to expand their production as a result of the pandemic's foods chain supply breakdowns that happened everywhere. And so we're in the midst of putting together some projects that would involve expanding a couple of the processors in the region. Not really ready for prime time yet in terms of talking about, but a lot of the producers in the area have been complaining that they have to wait literally a year or a year and a half for a slot to process their animals, and that's been an increasing jam in the supply chain. So we're investing in animal processing. Go figure. So
it's amazing how things change.
how true.
That's interesting. Well, as you get a little farther along, I think we'll want to hear more about.
Yeah, we'll want to share because it's something that might have, a lot of impact on a lot of other processors. One of the ways we're trying to assess is that could we figure out a way to subsidize processing if indeed the producers who are going to get their animals processed there will agree to do a full exclusion and BMP installation? Is there a way to do that without violating some antitrust issues? And turns out the stuff is complicated. Go figure.
Yeah, there you go. Hey, well, let's broaden the horizons here, and I'm gonna throw it to Pat. You got some interesting things because you could bring us stuff that could be from all over the world.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, I haven't shared some of my work, so I'm doing watershed finance plans nationally. So I'm doing work in the Delaware River, Houston, Puget Sound, and some Chesapeake Bay work outside of Virginia. So, and there may be some output from that in terms of a workshop or something down the road. So I've always felt like home base was, I thought the Rappahannock River could benefit from my work. So hopefully in terms of financial mechanisms that could be useful for Virginia's watersheds, I hope to have something to show this year.
Would should I take from that that you'd like to have us dedicate a little bit of agenda time in the near future to at least give us a teaser?
It might be useful just to kind of share, because I've done a lot of work on this. It's kind of like the heart of my post-retirement full-time 80-hour a week.
That doesn't sound much like retirement there. But.
And these are paid clients, and there's important conferences. So it might be useful just to give an overview, because I think, and I'm on the board of Virginia Forever, and we're starting on a new 5-year strategic plan. And so all of this is relevant, to that process going forward. And I had a kind of a question. So yesterday there's an announcement that somehow Virginia had a $500 million budget surplus.
That they expect it to be somewhere in that neighborhood. That was the Secretary of Finance's comments to House Appropriations 2 days ago and Senate Finance and Appropriations yesterday.
And I was curious. So the question is, does the Rappahannock River Basin Commission have any issues that would be kind of brought back into funding issues that might be reciprocated from? Is this billions of dollars of COVID relief? Does that show up in the Rappahannock River Basin?
Oh boy, the latest funding, the guidance is still coming out. You got lots of money coming directly to counties for specific types of uses. And the list, they can do infrastructure improvement. You've got different pot of money that go to cities. You've got a different pot of money that comes to the state. And there's just this long list of things that can be done. I think, there is the opportunity. I think there's a potential to move up the timetable, possibly on some wastewater projects. And I think of the city of Fredericksburg, they're 3 years out for the upgrade to their wastewater plant. We're actually going to be having some discussion with them. Could they take advantage of some of this money that's coming through, that they could speed that process up? Pat, it gets really complicated. Virginia, as you know, has independent cities. There are only a couple other independent cities in the country, Baltimore being one, St. Louis being another. There may be one or two others. Well, the structure that was written at the federal level did not anticipate independent cities. So thank goodness for Representative Bobby Scott, who is, I think, chairman of the key subcommittee there, was able to help craft the legislation such that Virginia's independent cities are treated also as counties, because the county definition and how that money worked would be the primary deliverer of services across their geography. And cities are like towns are in Virginia, are subsets. And so Virginia had to be treated, as well as Baltimore and St. Louis had to be treated differently. And so let's say city of Fredericksburg, they get a city appropriation and they get a county appropriation because they act like a county relative to the way other states are. And they'll come in two tranches. They'll get their first tranche within like 60 days of when the money is released. And then within a year, they get the second half. There's probably more than you wanted to know, but it is. We've been trying to figure all this out, and the guidance is dribbling out. You know, for example, school repair. You probably can repair HVAC systems, but can you repair roofs? From an air quality standpoint, maybe, because if you have a leaky roof, you got mold. Well, that question's unanswered. You can't build a new school. All right. And so there's all those kind of details, Pat, that are coming out. The short answer is there is some opportunity, and stormwater is a potential. And the Senate Finance Committee pretty much let Senate Finance staff know yesterday, we want to know whether that can happen. And if we're going to do stormwater, can we do ag BMPs? So that's an unanswered question, but it's one that's it didn't come up in the House discussion, but it sure came up yesterday in Senate Finance discussion. So pardon the long answer, but man, it is a complicated, and there's a lot of money.
Yeah, interesting.
You know, I mean, Fredericksburg, between the two tranches, it's like $13 million. And then there's statewide money to support some of these things that the state could throw at various and sundry things. For example, if ag BMPs become eligible, what does that mean? And that would come from the state money. So, I don't know, stay tuned, more to come.
If Virginians weren't so honest and hardworking, we could have a party at the Silk Mill Inn.
That sounds great, especially if we're all vaccinated and we don't have to wear masks.
And it probably constitutes mental health services at this point.
Without a doubt, without a doubt. All right, Pat, let's figure out a time whether June is too soon for you to.
Hey, sure. Let's have a talk.
Okay. All right, and I guess because of your question, I probably ought to see if we can do something about some just general information on what those federal funds can be used for, and what are the opportunities from water quality standpoint. Like I said, I know that on the infrastructure side, relative to wastewater or water supply, those things, there is a great deal of eligibility. Okay, it's not anything goes, but there are opportunities there.
As long as I have an open mic here for a second, I'd like to just key off of Michelle comments. She's talking about CAST. And so I get invited to these CAST tutorials, and it's very interesting for me it's actually important for me to understand from a natural infrastructure point of view, kind of how this works out. And I'm not, as somebody said, I'm not completely dumb. And I find those tutorials hopeless and useless. And unless you're a fully paid city planner, I don't know what you do with that information. So it'd be nice if you could dumb down CAST for one of these sessions, and maybe take the Rappahannock as a working example, and show what's going on. Because I've given up on educating myself on CAST. It's just like my pay grade doesn't get me there.
I mean, this is Michelle. I would agree with that. I don't think that anybody other than the MS4s are using CAST. I don't think most of the localities are even using CAST. I don't even think a lot of the MS4s, the small MS4s, are using CAST either. I just think it's more of a planning tool for the state and your really big MS4s.
I rest my case.
Okay. All right. I'll let me give some thought to what's the best way to do that. and we'll hold that as a future agenda slot. And I'll reserve any of my commentary on CAST. Then somebody will close my open mic. So anyway, anything else for the good of the order, folks? Thank you very much. Jack, welcome to the group. As you see, we have pretty good attendance for about an hour. Once we start running over an hour, it gets a little tougher for folks. The best thing that probably happened was the pandemic, and we switched from in-person meetings where everybody had to travel to Fredericksburg to doing it this way. I was talking with the chairman about how we'll probably continue with the technical committee in this format. We do tend to get better participation, and it saves people driving time. So anyway, again, Jack, we're really glad to have you as part of the team. Obviously, some of the stuff we do isn't of interest to your professional area, but you've got a lot of experience on the river, and you'll be helpful to all the rest of us.
Well, thank you all very much, and I look forward to working with you all. And I'm still learning the ropes from the emergency management aspect, but all of that being said, if there's anything I can reach out to our dive and water rescue team leadership now to help you all with, and also please feel free to use me as part of a network. I know we have a large scale exercise coming up tomorrow on the Rappahannock River, and I know that the emergency response organizations are in the process of forming a Rappahannock River response group, so that we can, let's say, for lack of a better phrase, tear down the political boundary that the Rappahannock River creates and start responding in a more coordinated effort instead of a this is my river type effort. So there's a lot of good efforts going on from the emergency response aspect, but again, look forward to working with everybody. Thank you for having me.
Okay. Thanks very much. And Jack, maybe we'll have some agenda time for some of that emergency response effort. Be informative, and maybe even informative to bump up at some point to the commission level as you guys move forward. Anyway, all right. Well, thanks everybody, and we'll look for information on the next one. Pat, I'll be calling you.
Great.
See you all soon. Bye-bye.
Take care. Thanks, Kevin.